I'm going to tell you this the way I'd tell it to someone I trust, which means I'm going to tell you the parts that make me sound unstable alongside the parts that don't. I've decided I don't care anymore how it sounds. I've been deciding that for 3 years, and this is the first time I've actually followed through. My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 41 years old. I worked as a night shift telephone technician for a regional telecommunications company in Central Oregon for 11 years. My job, simplified, was this. When something broke on the line infrastructure between midnight and 6 in the morning, I was the person who drove out to fix it. I worked alone. I worked in the dark, in switching stations and utility corridors and junction boxes at the end of gravel roads. I was comfortable with isolation. I want to be clear about that because it matters. I was not a person who spooked easily. I had eaten sandwiches in the basements of century-old relay buildings at 3 in the morning without a second thought. I was, professionally and temperamentally, the wrong person for what happened to me, which is maybe why it chose me. I don't know. I've spent 3 years trying to work out the logic, and I've concluded there may not be any logic to find. What I know is what I heard. And what I heard started on an ordinary Tuesday in March, at a switching station on a logging road outside a town called Fern Creek, and it did not stop for 8 months. I'm going to tell you all of it. The switching station at Fern Creek Road was a prefabricated metal building about the size of a one-car garage. These stations exist all over rural Oregon. They are the infrastructure that keeps landline telephone service running through areas where cell coverage is thin. Most people have never seen the inside of one. They're not interesting. Racks of equipment, cooling fans, a smell of warm electronics and old insulation. They hum. That's the dominant sensory experience of a switching station, the hum. I'd been to Fern Creek Road dozens of times over the years. The station there had chronic issues with moisture intrusion. The seal around the cable entry point had never been right, and every wet winter it caused problems. I knew the building the way you know a difficult coworker, its specific flaws, its patterns, what it would do when the weather changed. That March night, I'd been dispatched for a line fault affecting 4 rural subscribers. Routine. I drove out, let myself in with my keycard, and started running diagnostics. The fault was in the distribution frame, exactly where I'd have guessed. I was maybe 20 minutes into the repair when I heard the voice. I want to be precise about what I heard, because I've replayed it thousands of times, and I've been careful not to let the memory grow into something larger than it was. It was a woman's voice. It came from the equipment rack, specifically from the area of the older analog relay panels that the company had never fully decommissioned. It said clearly and without static, "Is anyone there?" I stood up from where I'd been crouching. The station was empty. I was alone. The door was locked behind me. The voice had been close, not distant, not tinny the way voices sound through speakers. Close, the way a person standing next to you is close. I told myself it had come through the equipment. Live circuits, crossed lines, bleed through from an active call. It happens occasionally with older analog infrastructure. I'd heard fragments of conversations before, half a sentence, a laugh, a phone ringing on a dead line. I noted it, finished the repair, and drove home. I did not think about it again for 9 days, until I went back to Fern Creek Road for a follow-up check and heard it again. The second time was different. Not in the voice itself, the same woman, the same clear, close quality, but in what it said. I had been in the station for perhaps 5 minutes, running a line test, when it came again from the same area of the rack. Daniel. Just my name. Nothing before it, nothing after. I put down my test set. There are moments in life where your body understands something before your mind is willing to. This was one of those moments. My hands had gone very still, and the hair on my forearms was standing up, and some part of me that operated below language had already concluded something serious, while the thinking part of me was still assembling rational explanations. Crossed lines. A colleague playing a prank. A hallucination from fatigue. I'd been sleeping badly. I said out loud into the humming room, "Who's there?" Silence, the fans, the hum. I did something I'm not proud of. I left. I logged the visit as complete and drove back to town and sat in a diner until the sun came up. I drank 3 cups of coffee and read the news on my phone and did not think about what had said my name in a locked building at 2 in the morning. Or I tried not to. I wasn't successful. I want to give you the context that explains what I did next, because otherwise my behavior doesn't make sense. I had grown up in a family that did not discuss the inexplicable. My father was an engineer. My mother was a practical woman who believed that unusual experiences were the product of overtiredness, dehydration, or a desire for attention. I had absorbed this framework thoroughly enough that even as an adult, my first response to anything anomalous was to find the mechanical explanation. This is a useful trait in a technician. It had served me well. And it meant that when something resisted the mechanical explanation, I didn't have good tools for what came next. What I did was go back. 3 nights later, during a scheduled maintenance window, I returned to Fern Creek Road with my work equipment, and in my jacket pocket, a digital voice recorder I'd bought at an electronics store that afternoon. The purchase had felt embarrassing. I'd paid cash. I set the recorder on top of the analog relay panel and worked for 2 hours in silence. The voice said nothing. The recorder picked up fans and hum and the occasional relay click and nothing else. I drove home feeling both relieved and foolish and told myself it was over. It was not over. The following week, without a work order to justify the trip, I drove to Fern Creek Road on my own time at 1 in the morning and sat in my truck across from the station for 40 minutes. I'm telling you this because I think it's important to be honest about the pull the thing had. I hadn't decided to go. I'd woken up at midnight and found myself, with the quality of someone walking in their sleep, putting on my boots and getting into my truck. The pull was already established by then, I think. I just hadn't named it yet. I sat in the truck. I didn't go in. I drove home. I slept until noon. And the next morning, I filed for a voluntary station inspection, a legitimate work task that would get me back inside with a clipboard and a reason to be there. The 3rd time I heard the voice was the first time I answered it. I'd been in the station for 20 minutes, running a legitimate check on the moisture intrusion I'd been tracking for years, when it came again from the relay panel. The same voice, clear, close, "Daniel, I need you to listen." I set down my clipboard. My heart was going very fast. But my voice, when I spoke, was steady. Dispatch training, I always joked with the actual dispatchers I knew, would have been wasted on me because I go calm when things go wrong. It's not courage. It's more like a circuit breaker. I said, "I'm listening." What came back was not a sentence. It was several seconds of what I can only describe as pressure. The air in the room changed quality. The hum from the fans seemed to recede. And then there was a sound that my brain initially processed as white noise, and then, very slowly, began to resolve into something that had the cadence of speech without being intelligible speech. Like a voice behind glass. Like a recording played just below the threshold of clarity. Then it stopped. The fans came back. The room was what it had been. I stood in the center of the station for a long time without moving. When I left, I sat in my truck and wrote in my phone's notes app everything I could remember about the sound, the quality of it, the way it had felt in the room. I don't know why I did this. Partly it was the technician's instinct, log what you observe. And partly it was something else. The sense that what had happened was important in a way I didn't understand yet, and that if I let it go unrecorded, I would regret it. I still have those notes. I've read them many times. They don't fully capture what I heard. Nothing I've written does. But they are the closest I can get. Over the following 6 weeks, I returned to Fern Creek Road 11 times. 4 of those visits were work-related. 7 were not. Each time, the voice came. Always from the same location. Always the same woman, or what I'd come to think of as the same woman, though I had no rational basis for that beyond the voice's consistency. It never said anything that exceeded a sentence or two. It said my name. It said, listen. It said, on one occasion that I've spent considerable time thinking about, you're the first one who stayed. I asked questions. Most of them went unanswered. But twice I received something I'd describe as a response. Not a direct answer to what I'd asked, but a shift in the room's quality that felt communicative. A change in pressure, a change in the character of the hum that gave me the distinct sense of attention, of being heard. I started doing research. I want to be honest about how embarrassing this was for a person with my background and self-image. I looked up the history of the switching station. I looked up telephone company records at the County Historical Society. I talked to a retired telecom worker named Hal Brecker, who had worked the same territory in the 1970s and 80s. What Hal told me, over coffee at his kitchen table, started to explain some things. And then it explained too much, and I stopped being able to dismiss what was happening to me as equipment malfunction. The Fern Creek Road switching station had been built in 1962 on the site of a previous structure, an early telephone relay building dating to the 1940s. The original building had been used by a small team of telephone operators who worked rotating shifts. This was the era before automatic switching, when calls in rural areas were still routed by human operators who physically connected calls through a patch panel. There had been 3 operators assigned to Fern Creek Road during the war years. One of them, a woman named Ruth Pelletier, had worked the night shift from 1943 until 1951. She had never married. She had, by all accounts Hal knew of, been deeply dedicated to the work, the kind of person who treated the connection of a rural subscriber to the outside world as something close to a calling. In the winter of 1951, Ruth Pelletier had died at a station. Heart failure, the record said. She had been found by the morning operator still seated at a panel, headset on, one hand resting on the patch cords. She had been 43 years old. I sat at Hal's kitchen table and felt the specific cold that isn't temperature. It starts behind the sternum. It moves up slowly. I asked Hal if he'd ever experienced anything unusual at the Fern Creek station. He looked at me for a moment in the way that older people look at you when they are deciding whether you're ready for an answer. Then he said, "Son, there's a reason the night shift out there always went to the new guys. I need to tell you about what happened in July, because it's the part I've been building toward and the part I've told the fewest people. It was a Saturday night in mid-July. No work order, no justification. I drove to Fern Creek Road at midnight with my recorder and my phone and a thermos of coffee, and I sat in the truck for 10 minutes, and then I went inside. The station was as it always was. Hum, fans. The smell of warm electronics. I set up the recorder and sat on the floor with my back against the wall opposite the relay panel and I said into the room, "Ruth, I know about you. I know what happened here. I'm not going anywhere." The quality of the room changed immediately. Not gradually, the way it sometimes had. Immediately, like a door opening. The hum dropped an octave. The fans seemed to slow, though when I checked them later they hadn't. The temperature dropped, and I know how that sounds, but it dropped enough that I could see my breath in July in Oregon. And then the voice came, and this time it was not behind glass. This time it was clear. "Don't," it said, one word. A warning. Not threatening. I want to be specific about this, because the distinction matters to me. It didn't feel like a threat. It felt like the voice of someone watching you walk toward something you couldn't see yet. I said, "Don't what?" The pressure built. The sound behind glass came back, and this time I held absolutely still and listened with everything I had. The way I'd listened to failing equipment in difficult conditions, the diagnostic attention that I'd trained for years, and slowly, the way a signal resolves when you adjust the filter, it became language. It said, "Don't come back." And then the hum returned to normal, and the temperature rose, and the room was a room again. I sat on the floor of that switching station for 40 minutes before I could make myself stand up. I've thought about those two words for 3 years. I've turned them over the way you turn over a stone to see what's underneath, and I've arrived at several possible meanings, and I'm not sure which one is right or whether they're all right simultaneously. The first possibility, she was warning me away from something. Something in the station, or something about the station, that I was in danger of. The way you'd warn a child away from a stove. The second possibility, she was telling me that what I was doing, the returning, the listening, the pull I'd been following without fully examining it, was costing something. That she could feel me coming. That my presence was not neutral. The third possibility, which I resisted the longest, and which I've come to think is the most accurate, she was afraid. Not of me specifically, but of what the contact was doing to her, or to whatever she was. The way she'd said it. The register of it. It wasn't authority. It was desperation. I drove home that night and I did not go back to Fern Creek Road for 6 weeks. Not because I decided not to. Because every time I thought about going back, I remembered the drop in her voice on that single word, and it stopped me the way very few things in my life have stopped me. Don't. The thing I haven't told you yet is the recording. I'd had the recorder running every time I'd visited the station. 11 visits. Hours of audio. I'd listened to all of it carefully multiple times. The hum, the fans. My own footsteps, my own voice asking questions into a room. Nothing else. Every time. Until I listened to the July recording. I'd gotten home at 2 in the morning, and I'd been too shaken to listen immediately. I waited until the following afternoon, when it was full daylight, and I'd slept and eaten and done normal things, and I sat at my kitchen table with headphones on and played the recording back. For the first 14 minutes, hum and fans and me settling onto the floor. My voice saying Ruth's name. My voice saying I wasn't going anywhere. And then, at the 14-minute mark, something the recorder had picked up that I had not heard in the room. Breathing, not mine. I was breathing slowly, and the recording had my breath on it, and this was different. Faster, shallow, the breathing of someone frightened or running. It came from the direction of the relay panel, close to the microphone, and it lasted for approximately 90 seconds, and then it stopped, and then my voice said, "Don't what?" To a room that had apparently been, on some channel I couldn't access in real time, occupied. There was no voice on the recording. Not the one I'd heard. The words were not there. Only the breathing. 90 seconds of someone terrified and close, audible to the machine and not to me. I've had the recording analyzed by 2 audio engineers. Both confirmed it was not a processing artifact. Both had no explanation for the source. I still have the file. I listen to it sometimes. Not often, but sometimes. When I need to remind myself that what I experienced was real and not a thing my mind assembled from loneliness and night work and too much coffee on logging roads at 2 in the morning. It's real. The breathing is real. 90 seconds of a woman frightened in a building where she died in 1951, picked up by a $30 digital recorder because I had the right instinct on the wrong night. I went back once more. I'd promised myself I wouldn't, but I did, and I've made peace with the fact that the pull was stronger than the promise. It was September. I went in the afternoon, not at night, which felt like a compromise I could live with. The station was the same. Hum and fans and the moisture smell. I stood in front of the relay panel for a long time without speaking. Then I said, "I heard you. I'm not coming back after this. I just needed you to know that I heard you, and I'm sorry that it cost you something." The room did not change. No pressure drop. No shift in the hum, no voice. Either she wasn't there, or she'd taken me at my word the first time, in July. Either she was gone, or she'd been gone for months already, and what I'd been returning to was an empty building, and the pull I'd been following was my own need to explain something that maybe didn't want to be explained. I don't know which of those is true. I've decided I don't need to. What I needed was to say what I said, and then to leave, and then not to go back. I haven't gone back. I left the company 8 months later. Not because of what had happened, or not entirely. The truth is that 11 years of midnight drives on logging roads had accumulated in my body in ways I hadn't noticed while I was doing it, and I was tired in a way that sleep wasn't fixing. I moved to Portland. I work in IT now, which is indoor work in daylight hours, and I haven't set foot in a switching station since. I want to tell you what I think happened, with the acknowledgement that I hold this interpretation loosely and would revise it if I had better information. I think Ruth Pelletier died at a station doing the work she'd done for years, and something of her stayed in the equipment she'd been attached to, not in a metaphorical sense, not as a memory the building held, but actually stayed. In the way that a signal persists in old infrastructure long after it should have degraded. In the way that things go on in analog systems, slowly, past the point where anyone expects them to. I think she had been trying to reach someone for a long time. And I think that when I finally heard her and stayed, she was not relieved. She was frightened. Because whatever she was, she'd been alone for 50 years, and the contact was costing her something, and she was lucid enough to know it. That's what I can't let go of. Not the voice, not the cold, not the breathing on the recording. The lucidity. The fear that was for me, not of me. She was warning me away from something that was also hurting her, and she did it clearly and plainly in 2 words, and that is the most human thing I have ever encountered. I don't know what happens to the people who stay inside old equipment, in the dark, in buildings no one visits, on roads with no names. I don't know if she's still there, or if the contact finally broke something loose. I don't know if the night operator who comes after me will hear her, or if he'll hear something worse because I stirred the water. What I know is what she said, and what I promised, and that I've kept it. I hope she knows. I don't know what knowing means for whatever she is now. But I hope it anyway, in the specific way you hope for things that are entirely outside your ability to verify or control. The recording is on a hard drive in my apartment. I back it up. I don't know why I back it up. Evidence, maybe. Or witness. The sense that someone should keep a record of the fact that Ruth Pelletier, telephone operator, Fern Creek Road, 1943 to 1951, was there, is there. Was afraid. Tried to protect me anyway. The least I can do is not let that disappear. The call came in at 11:47 on a Thursday night in November. I know the exact time because I log every dispatch call, which is habit after 14 years doing this work. The ticket said, Remote Relay Station, County Road 7, signal loss on trunk line 4, customer reports complete outage since approximately 9 p.m. Priority 2. Estimated drive time from the depot, 40 minutes. I've worked night shift for the phone company since I was 26. I'm 40 now, and I want you to understand what that means in practical terms. 14 years of driving to places most people have never heard of, in the dark by myself, to work on equipment in buildings that are sometimes unlocked and sometimes not, sometimes staffed and sometimes empty. I have been inside every kind of facility this company operates. I have fixed lines in flooded junction boxes and repaired trunk cables in ice storms at 2 in the morning, and spent 6 hours alone in a switching station outside of Barre, Vermont, in January, while the temperature dropped to 11 below. I am not someone who is unfamiliar with solitude or darkness, or the specific quality of silence that old equipment makes when it's off. I am telling you this because I want you to understand the baseline. I want you to understand what kind of person was at that station on that road in November, so that when I tell you what I heard, you understand that I am not someone who hears things. The station on County Road 7 was a relay facility built in the early 1950s. Small cinder block building, maybe 800 square feet, sat at the end of a gravel access road about 300 yards off the county route. Forest on all sides. The building housed legacy switching equipment, most of it decommissioned, but kept in place because the cost of removal had never been approved, and a bank of more modern rack-mounted hardware that actually carried the current traffic. My job was the modern equipment. The old stuff was supposed to be inert. I got there just after 12:30. Gravel road, my headlights sweeping through the trees. The building was dark from the outside, which was normal. The interior lighting was on a motion sensor, and nothing had moved in there for hours. I parked, got my bag, used my key to unlock the door. Motion sensor picked me up. Fluorescent lights flickered on. I stood in the doorway for a moment, doing what I always do when I enter an unfamiliar station for the first time: orient myself. Room layout, equipment positions, exit locations. Old habit. It takes about 10 seconds. The station looked exactly like the site survey photos in the ticket. Long room, low ceiling, the modern rack equipment along the right wall, the old switchboard infrastructure filling most of the left side and the back. The switchboard stuff was impressive in the way old industrial equipment is impressive. Floor-to-ceiling panels of jacks and cords and switches. The kind of manual telephone exchange that would have taken several operators working simultaneously to run. Completely dark. Completely silent. I went to the rack equipment and started running diagnostics. The fault was straightforward: a failed interface card in the trunk 4 module. I had a spare in my bag. The whole job was going to take maybe 40 minutes. I was 20 minutes in, replacing the card, when I heard it. A sound from the old switchboard. Not a loud sound. Not a dramatic sound. The small, specific sound of a cord being plugged into a jack. I stopped what I was doing. The old equipment was supposed to be completely decommissioned. No power, no signal, no active connections. It was physically present in the building, because nobody had approved the budget to remove it, but it was dead hardware. It should not have been making any sounds. I stood very still and listened. Silence. 20 seconds, 30. Then the click of a key being depressed on the old board. The kind of toggle switch that operators use to open a circuit. I turned around slowly and looked at the switchboard. The boards were dark. No indicator lights, no activity. But at the far left panel I could see, or thought I could see, a faint amber glow from one of the indicator positions. The kind of light that means an open line. I walked over. The light was real. One indicator position, bottom left panel, third row from the bottom, seventh jack from the left. A small amber light, dim but steady, in a board that had no power source I could account for. I stood in front of that panel for a long moment. Then I did what any reasonable technician does when he finds something he doesn't understand. I reached for the headset hanging on the hook beside the panel. Old equipment, still there because nobody had cleared the station properly. I put it on. I said, "Hello. This is Daniel Marsh, field technician, Northeast Telephone. Is anyone there?" Static. Long and low, the particular hiss of an old analog line. And then, from somewhere inside that static, a woman's voice said, "Daniel." I want to be very precise about what I heard, because precision matters here, and because I have replayed this moment a great many times. The voice said my first name. Just that, one word. It was a woman's voice, middle-aged or older, with a quality that I can only describe as professional. Not frightened, not excited. The measured, neutral tone of someone doing a job. The tone of someone who says names on the phone many times a day and has developed a way of saying them that is clear and efficient and nothing more. The static continued under and after the word. The amber light held steady. I said, "Who is this? How are you accessing this line? This equipment is decommissioned." Static. A long stretch of it, maybe 15 seconds. Then quieter, "Daniel." Same word. Same voice. Same tone. As if she was confirming something. As if she was making sure she had the right person. I took the headset off. I stood in front of that panel for probably 2 minutes without moving. Then I finished replacing the interface card in the modern equipment, ran my tests, confirmed the outage was resolved, logged my ticket, and left. I drove the 40 minutes back to the depot and filed my paperwork and went home and made coffee and sat at my kitchen table until 4 in the morning. A voice from decommissioned equipment had said my name. I told myself, stray signal. I told myself, interference from the active equipment creating artifact noise in old hardware. I told myself, I was tired, and my brain assembled a word out of static the way brains assemble faces in clouds. By the time I went to bed, I had almost convinced myself. Almost. I went back the following week. Not for a work reason. There was no ticket for that station, no reported issue. I told myself I was doing a follow-up check, which is a thing we sometimes do, but which wasn't required. I signed a vehicle out of the depot on my own time on a Tuesday evening and drove to County Road 7. I brought a recorder, a small digital unit I used for dictating field notes. I set it on the shelf in front of the old switchboard and put the headset on and waited. For a long time, nothing. 20 minutes of static and silence, the amber light absent. I was starting to think I'd imagined the whole thing when I heard the cord plug sound again. That small, specific click. The amber light came on. I said, "Hello. My name is Daniel Marsh. I was here last week. I heard your voice, static. Then Marsh. My last name this time. Same voice. Same professional neutrality. I said, yes. Daniel Marsh. I'm a telephone technician. I work on the equipment in this building. A long pause. Static shifting and moving the way static does. The white noise of an open analog line. Then something that might have been, I know. I asked, who are you? Nothing. The static continued, but no voice came through it. I asked again, can you tell me who you are? Silence for maybe 30 seconds. Then the cordon plug sound. The amber light went out. I drove home and listened to the recording. My voice was clear on it. The static was there, low and consistent. The chord sounds were there, both of them, sharp and distinct. There was no woman's voice on the recording. I listened 3 times. I put headphones on and turned the volume up and listened again. My voice, static. The chord sounds. No other voice. I sat at my kitchen table and thought about what it means when you hear something that a recorder doesn't catch. Then I opened my laptop and started researching the station. The historical record on small relay facilities isn't extensive, but it exists if you know where to look. The station on County Road 7 was originally built in 1951 as a manual exchange serving rural customers in that part of the county. It was converted to automated switching in 1968 when the old manual exchanges were being phased out across the region. The conversion made the operator positions redundant. The building was repurposed as a relay facility and has remained one ever since. I found the 1951 construction records in our company's archived documentation. We are the successor company to several regional providers that were consolidated over the decades, and we kept their paper records when we absorbed them. A lot of it was in storage boxes that hadn't been opened in 30 years. The station had employed 3 full-time operators when it opened. Rural exchanges at that time ran around the clock. Someone had to be there to connect calls manually, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. 3 operators, rotating shifts. I found their names in the personnel records. Margaret Hoole, Dorothy Sims, Ruth Pelletier. I cross-referenced against the company's old incident reports, which we also kept. On March 14, 1951, Ruth Pelletier died at the station. She was 44 years old. The incident report was brief, 1 paragraph, typed on an old manual typewriter with a faded ribbon. It said, cardiac event, occurred during night shift. Operator found unresponsive at her position by relief operator arriving for morning shift. Pronounced at scene. I read that paragraph 4 times. Found unresponsive at her position. Her position. The switchboard. The panel where the amber light came on. I looked at the 3rd row from the bottom, 7th jack from the left. I thought about a woman sitting at that position in 1951, connecting calls through the night, in this building in the middle of a forest on a county road in November. And I thought about what it means to die at work, in the dark, and whether anything of a person can stay in the place where they were when it happened. I added Ruth Pelletier's name to my field notebook, which I always carry. Then I drove back to County Road 7. Over the next 6 weeks, I went back 8 times. I kept the recorder running every time. And every time, the result was the same. My voice clear, the static present, the chord sounds distinct, and no other voice captured on the recording. Only on the headset. Only in my ear. The contact, I'd started thinking of it as contact, which I was aware was a loaded word, was inconsistent. Some nights, the amber light didn't come on at all. Some nights it came on, but only static came through, no voice. Some nights there were words. The words were always brief, always that same professional neutrality. I kept a log of every phrase I heard, written down immediately after each session before memory could adjust them. Session 3, line 4. Just that. As if she was telling me something about the equipment. Line 4 was the trunk that had failed the night I first came to the station. Session 5, late. Said in a tone that was not alarmed, just observational. As if noting the hour. It was 1 a.m. Session 6, nothing. 25 minutes of static, and then the line closed. Session 7, don't go yet. That one stopped me. I sat with the headset on and said, I'm not going anywhere, I'm here. And the static shifted, and I heard, very quietly, something that might have been the sound of someone exhaling. Just once. And then the line closed. I drove home that night and sat at my kitchen table for a long time. I'm a practical person. I'm not someone who is comfortable in ambiguity. My job is to find the fault and fix it, to trace a problem back to its source and resolve it. And I'd been sitting with this unresolvable thing for 6 weeks, and I could feel it starting to affect me. I was tired in a way I couldn't account for. I was thinking about the station when I was supposed to be thinking about other things. My supervisor had noticed that I was volunteering for the routes that took me near County Road 7. I knew I had to do something definitive. I decided to say her name. Session 8 was a Saturday in January. I arrived at 10 p.m. Set the recorder as usual. Put the headset on. The amber light came on almost immediately, faster than it ever had. As if it had been waiting, static. I let it sit for a minute without speaking, the way I'd learned to do. Give it time. Don't push. Then I said, my name is Daniel Marsh. I've been coming here for 6 weeks. I've been listening. I've been trying to understand. Static. I found the records, I said. The personnel files. The incident report from 1951. The static shifted. Changed quality. I've spent enough time listening to analog line noise that I can hear its textures, and this shift was real, a tightening, like a signal trying to resolve itself. I know what happened here, I said. I know you were working the night shift. I know they found you in the morning. A long silence. Longer than usual. 40 seconds, maybe more. Then I said her name, Ruth. The static went clean. I don't mean it reduced. I mean it disappeared. One moment the line was full of that low analog hiss, and the next moment it was silent, the perfect, pressure-filled silence of an open line with nothing on it. The kind of silence that means someone is there and has stopped breathing so they can hear you better. I said, Ruth Pelletier. I know your name. And she said clearly in that same professional voice, but without any static at all, without any noise, without any interference, the clearest I had ever heard her, don't come back. Not don't go, not stay. Don't come back. Future tense. Directed not at the present moment, but at everything after it. The amber light went out. I sat in the station for a long time with the headset still on, listening to the silence where the line had been. I drove home and listened to the recording. My voice clear. The chord sounds. The long silence I'd sat through before speaking. My words, everything I'd said. And then, in the stretch where I'd heard the line go clean, in the space between my saying her name and my saying her full name, not her voice, not the words she'd said to me, but something else. Something I had not heard in the room while I was sitting there. Breathing. Not my breathing. Close to the recorder, which was sitting on the shelf perhaps 3 feet from where I'd been standing with the headset on. quick and shallow, the way a person breathes when they are frightened or in pain. Irregular. 4, maybe 5 cycles of it, and then nothing. I listened to that section of the recording 11 times over the following 2 days. It was there every time. 4 or 5 short, shallow breaths close to the microphone. In a building I was alone in. On a recorder that had never captured her voice. I thought about what that meant for a long time. She had said, "Don't come back." She had said it clearly, cleanly, in the moment when I'd finally made real contact, when I'd said her name and the static had cleared and she'd been able to speak without interference for the first time. The first unambiguous thing she'd ever said to me, and it was a warning. A direction. And on the recorder, in the room with me while I'd been at the headset, breathing that wasn't mine. Short and shallow and frightened. I am a practical person. I find faults and fix them. I trace problems to their source. It took me 2 days to arrive at the conclusion that had probably been available to me for weeks, if I'd been willing to look at it. The contact hurt her. Not symbolically. Not in some abstract sense. Whatever it took for her to produce a signal on that board, whatever it cost to push sound through a line that had no power source, whatever the effort was of making herself heard across 70 years of silence, it cost something. The breathing on the recorder was the sound of that cost. And she had spent 6 weeks paying it because I kept coming back, and she couldn't reach me any other way. She'd been trying to tell me to stop since the beginning. "Don't go yet" had not been a request to stay. It had been an attempt to say what she finally managed to say in session 8. Don't come back. She'd been working up to it, trying to get the signal clear enough, trying to say the things she needed to say. And every time I came back, she had to try again. I closed my field notebook. I put Ruth Pelletier's name on a piece of paper, and I kept it on my kitchen table for the rest of that week. And I thought about her every day, and by the end of the week, I knew what I needed to do. I went back one more time, daytime. A Wednesday in late January, 2 in the afternoon, full winter light through the single window in the station's east wall. I unlocked the door and went in and stood in front of the old switchboard. I did not put the headset on. I stood in front of the panel and I spoke out loud to the room, the way you speak to someone when you're not sure exactly where they are, but you know they can hear you. I said, "Ruth, my name is Daniel Marsh. I'm the technician who's been coming here. I've been coming because I heard your voice and I couldn't leave it alone, and I didn't understand what I was doing to you until I listened to the recordings and understood what that breathing meant." The station was quiet. Fluorescent lights humming. The passive sound of equipment in standby. "I'm sorry," I said. "I'm sorry for coming back as many times as I did. I'm sorry for making you work that hard to tell me to stop. I heard you. I'm not going to use the headset anymore. I'm not going to try to make contact again." I paused. I found your personnel file. You worked here for 3 months before March of 1951. The records say you were reliable. They say you never missed a shift. I stopped. That was everything the records said about her, outside of the incident report. It wasn't much, but it was something. I wanted you to know someone read it. I stood there for another minute. The amber light did not come on. The board was silent. I said, "I won't be back." I locked the door behind me and walked to my truck and drove back to the depot. I have not been back to the station on County Road 7. I've driven past the entrance to the gravel road twice on legitimate service calls in the area. Both times, I kept moving. The station is still on the company's active inventory as a relay facility. There's no reason I'd need to go back unless a ticket came in, and I've quietly made sure that the tickets for that station go to the day shift. I've thought a lot about what happened there over the past 2 years. Not obsessively, not the way I was thinking about it when I was going back every week. That quality of thought has faded, which I take as a sign that I did the right thing when I stopped. But I returned to it. I returned to certain things, specifically. I returned to the fact that she knew my name the first night. Before I'd said a word, before I'd identified myself, she said my name. I have no explanation for that, and I've stopped trying to find one. I return to the recordings. 8 sessions, her voice never captured once. Only on the headset. Only in my ear. But the breathing caught, right at the microphone, in the moment of clearest contact. As if whatever she was existed close enough to the physical world to disturb air near a microphone, but not close enough to be captured as sound. I don't know what that distinction means. I don't know enough about what she was to understand the mechanics. I return to the 2 words she said when I finally said her name. Don't come back. Not help me, or I'm here, or finally you hear me. Don't come back. Her first clear message, when she finally had the signal to deliver one, was not about herself. It was about me. Or about the cost to her of being heard by me, which is the same thing. I think about Ruth Pelletier the way I think about certain jobs, the ones that went wrong in small ways, where you made a decision that turned out to be the wrong one, and where you can't go back and make a different choice, only try to mitigate the result. I went to that station 8 times when I should have gone once, and then not returned. I can't undo that. What I can do is stay away. There is one more thing I want to say, and then I'm done. A month after my last visit, I submitted a request to our facilities management team to have the old switchboard equipment at the County Road 7 station properly decommissioned and removed. I cited efficiency and safety concerns, which are legitimate. The old hardware takes up most of the floor space and serves no function. The request has been sitting in the queue for almost 2 years. I follow up on it every few months. I don't know if removing the board would change anything. I don't know if what I heard was attached to the hardware, or to the building, or to something that has nothing to do with either. I don't know enough to know. But the board is where she was when she died. The board is where she was in 1951, and where she was every time the amber light came on, and where she was when she finally said her 2 words clearly. I want it gone. Not because I'm afraid of it. Because if there's any chance that removing it changes something for her, releases something, settles something, ends whatever it is that has kept her at that position in that building for 70 years, then it's worth the paperwork. She told me she worked the night shift. She told me she was reliable. She never missed a shift. She's still there. And she's been on shift for a very long time. I'd like to find a way to let her go home. I'll start with what I know about radio, because most people don't know enough. A marine radio signal doesn't travel the way people imagine. It doesn't go in a straight line from point A to point B. It bends with the curve of the Earth. It bounces off the ionosphere. It gets absorbed by moisture and reflected by land masses and distorted by weather systems in ways that are predictable in aggregate and wildly unpredictable in any specific instance. I've been a maritime radio operator for 19 years, and one of the things I tell people who are new to the work is this. If you think you've heard something impossible on a marine band, the first thing you do is check your propagation tables. Because what sounds impossible usually isn't. Usually. My name is Carol Beatty. I'm 43. I worked, until 8 months ago, as the senior communications officer at a Coast Guard sector station on the Great Lakes. I won't name the specific station, which I'm sure is frustrating, But there are professional and personal reasons I want to keep the location general. What I will tell you is that it was a station with a long history, established in the early 1930s on a piece of lake coast that had been important to navigation since the 19th century. We had original equipment in storage that dated back to the station's first decade. We had log books that went back to 1934. We had, in the basement of the main building, a room that had once housed a telegraph relay that connected us to the wider maritime communication network when radio was still new enough to be supplemented rather than trusted completely. I'm telling you all of this because it matters. The age of the station matters. The equipment matters. The log books especially matter. The first time I received the transmission, it was a Tuesday in late February. 2:14 in the morning, my watch. We monitored channel 16 continuously. That's the international distress and calling frequency, 156.8 megahertz, required monitoring for all vessels. We also had secondary monitoring on working channels and some of the older guard frequencies that were now largely obsolete. On a night watch in February on the Great Lakes, you heard a lot of nothing. Shipping traffic was low because of ice. The lakes were quiet. Most of my watch was equipment checks, log entries, and the particular stillness of a station at 2 in the morning in winter. At 2:14, a signal came in on 500 kilohertz. I need to explain why that matters. 500 kilohertz is the old international maritime distress frequency. It was the standard for decades. If you were in trouble at sea before modern systems, you broadcast on 500 kHz. Ships were required to maintain a radio silence period twice an hour, 3 minutes at the top and bottom of the hour, so that any vessel transmitting a distress signal on 500 kHz could be heard. The international maritime community observed this for decades. It was called the silence period. Every radio operator of a certain generation knows about it. 500 kHz was formally decommissioned in 1999. The frequency is still there. You can still receive on it with the right equipment, but no one is supposed to be using it. Coast Guard stations keep legacy receivers for historical and monitoring purposes. Ours was in the corner of the comm room, kept powered but not actively staffed. I checked it periodically out of habit, more than procedure. At 2:14 on a Tuesday morning in February, I heard a transmission on 500 kHz. Morse code. CW mode, continuous wave. The old way. I pulled my chair over to the legacy receiver and put on the headset and listened. It was coming through clearly, which was the first strange thing. 500 kHz is noisy in winter, lots of atmospheric interference. A clear signal implied a transmitter at relatively close range. But the content of the transmission was what made me reach for my log book. The transmission was a distress signal. The old format, SOS followed by a position, followed by a vessel identifier. I copied it down as it came in, which is reflex, 19 years of copying down what I hear. The position was in Lake Superior. Not unusual. But the vessel identifier was Marigold. I knew that name. I knew it because it was in our log books. The Marigold was a bulk freighter that had gone down in Lake Superior in November of 1952 in a storm. 11 men aboard. No survivors. I want to be precise about my state of mind at that moment because I think it matters. I was not frightened. I was not immediately convinced. I was hearing something supernatural. I was a trained radio operator receiving an anomalous transmission, and my first response was professional skepticism. Stray signal, I thought. Historical recording played back over radio somehow. There are hobbyists who do things like that. Equipment malfunction, creating artifact noise that my tired brain was passing as recognizable patterns. I was 43 years old, and I'd been awake since 6 the previous morning, and it was 2 in the morning, and I'd been sitting in a quiet room for hours. But I copied down what I heard, because that's what you do. And then I pulled the 1952 log books. The station had been active in November of 1952. The storm that took the Marigold was well documented. It was one of the significant loss events in the lake's history during that period. Our log books from that month were meticulous. The way log books from that era were meticulous, because the people who kept them understood that the log might be the only record of what happened. I found the entry for November 14th, 1952. At 2:14 in the morning, the exact time, our station had received a distress transmission from the Marigold on 500 kHz. The radio operator on duty that night, a man named Roy Evers, had logged it precisely. Position, vessel ID, nature of distress. He had attempted to respond and had received no acknowledgement. He had relayed the distress call to the Regional Coordination Center. He had continued attempting contact until 4 a.m., when the transmission had ceased. The Marigold was found 12 days later on the lake bottom, in approximately the position Roy Evers had logged. I sat in the comm room at 2:30 in the morning with the 1952 logbook open in front of me and the notation I'd just made on the page beside it. The positions matched. The vessel name matched. The time matched. I closed the logbook and sat very still for a few minutes. Then I did what trained professionals do. I documented everything, filed an anomaly report, and finished my watch. I didn't tell anyone right away. This is the part of the story I'm least comfortable with, because it was the wrong professional decision, and I know it was the wrong professional decision, and I made it anyway. The reason I didn't report it immediately was that I had nothing to report that wasn't going to sound like a fatigued operator mishearing static. A transmission on a decommissioned frequency, matching the details of a 70-year-old distress call, received at the exact same time of night as the original. There was no way to present that to my commanding officer that didn't end with a conversation about sleep schedules and stress levels. And I was, at the time, in the middle of a review process for a promotion. I made a calculated decision that I'm not proud of. I set a reminder on my personal phone for the following Tuesday at 2 a.m. And I waited. The following Tuesday I came in early and volunteered for the night watch, which was not unusual for me. I sat down at the legacy receiver at 1:45 a.m. and put the headset on and waited. At 2:14, the transmission came in again. Identical. Position, vessel ID, distress format, SOS. The Marigold. Lake Superior. I listened to the entire transmission, about 90 seconds of Morse code, clean and clear on a frequency that should have been carrying nothing. I copied it down again, though I already knew what it said. I timed it. Start and finish matched the log entry from 1952 to within 2 minutes. Then I did something I hadn't done the first time. I responded. In Morse on 500 kHz, I transmitted, Marigold, this is Coast Guard Sector 9. We receive your distress. What is your status? Static. 30 seconds, a minute. Then the transmission began again. From the beginning. Position, vessel ID, distress format. Exactly as before. I listened to it a second time. Then I said out loud to the equipment in the empty room, I hear you. The transmission finished. Silence. I sat with the headset on until 4 a.m. The time Roy Evers had noted the original transmission ceasing. Nothing came through after that. I drove home at 6 a.m. and slept for 4 hours and came back and went to find the station's archived personnel records. Roy Evers had worked at our station from 1948 to 1967. He'd retired as a senior radio operator, the same position I held now. I found his personnel file in the archived records room, which was also where we kept the old log books. A low-ceilinged room in the basement that smelled like old paper and the particular mustiness of a building that had been periodically flooded and dried out over 90 years. Roy Evers had been 29 years old on the night the Marigold went down. He'd been on duty alone, which was standard for night watch in 1952. He'd received the distress call, attempted contact, relayed the information, and maintained his watch until the transmission ceased. His log entry was complete and professional. There was nothing in the file that suggested the event had affected him. But there was a note, paper-clipped to the inside of the personnel folder. A single sheet, handwritten, undated, not official correspondence. It looked like something he'd written for himself and left in the file by accident or deliberately for reasons I couldn't determine. It said, "Received Marigold again on the 14th. 4th year. No change in transmission. No response to contact attempts. Position consistent with wreck location confirmed by survey. I have no explanation. I have stopped looking for one. I note it and I move on. R.E. I read that note 3 times. 4th year. Roy Evers had been receiving the same transmission, on the same frequency, at the same time, for at least 4 years before he wrote that note. Possibly longer. And he'd done exactly what I'd done. Documented it, kept it to himself, stopped looking for an explanation. I held the note for a long time. Then I made a copy of it and put it in my personal notebook. I'm going to tell you what I found when I went through the full archive of night watch logs for the date of November 14th, going back as far as the records existed. This took me the better part of 3 weekends, going in on my days off and working through the basement archive with a flashlight and a lot of coffee. The oldest log books we had dated to 1934. November 14th, 1934. A routine watch entry, nothing anomalous. The station would have been 3 years old. November 14th, 1937. Nothing. 1938. Nothing. 1939 through 1951. Nothing. November 14th, 1952. Roy Evers's entry. The Marigold. November 14th, 1953. Another entry, the handwriting different. A different operator. He noted receiving a CW transmission on 500 kHz at approximately 0215. Unclear content, possible atmospheric artifact. No follow-up. November 14th, 1954. Roy Evers again, on duty. He noted the transmission clearly. Position, vessel name, time. 3 words at the end. 4th occurrence noted. November 14th, 1955 through 1967. I found Roy Evers's handwriting in the night watch log for almost every year. He'd arranged his schedule, I realized, to be on duty on that night. Not every year, he missed a few. And on those nights, the entry either noted nothing or noted a vague, atmospheric anomaly. But when Roy Evers was on duty on November 14th, he logged the Marigold. After 1967, when he retired, the record became inconsistent. Some years, nothing. Some years, a notation of interference or anomalous signal on 500 kHz, never identified. A few years with no entry at all, which probably meant whoever was on watch hadn't been monitoring the legacy frequency. And then, in the logs for November 14th, 7 years ago, an entry in handwriting I recognized as my predecessor's. Martin Gallagher, who'd been the senior communications officer before me. His entry said, "Anomalous transmission received 500 kHz 0214 hours. CW mode." Copied content as follows. And then the position, the vessel name, the distress format. And at the bottom, underlined, check archives for Marigold. Martin Gallagher had retired 6 years ago. I'd taken his position. He was living in Michigan now, I knew that much. I had his email address in my contacts from some administrative correspondence. I sent him an email that evening. Subject 500 kHz, November 14th. No other text. He replied in 40 minutes. His reply said, "You're on the night watch this month. When did you first hear it?" Martin Gallagher and I talked on the phone for almost 2 hours. He was 61, retired to a small house near a lake in the Upper Peninsula, and when I told him what I'd found in the archives, Roy Evers's personnel note, the pattern of entries going back to 1953, he was quiet for a long moment and then said, "I looked for Roy's note. I knew it had to be there. I couldn't find it." He told me what he'd experienced, the same transmission, the same frequency, the same time. He'd heard it twice, on consecutive years, before his retirement. He'd been on night watch both times, not by arrangement, but by accident. He'd been startled enough the second time to pull the 1952 logs, to find Roy Evers's entries, to write the note in his own log telling whoever came after him to check the archives. "I should have told someone," he said. "My C.O. I know that. But I'd been in the service for 30 years, and I knew how that conversation was going to go. I told him I'd made the same calculation. He said, 'There's something I want to ask you, and you don't have to answer. Did you respond to it?' I said yes. He was quiet for a moment. 'What happened?' I told him. It repeated the transmission from the beginning. Didn't acknowledge. Didn't change. He said, 'I tried twice. Same result. It's not like it's trying to be heard. It's already doing what it was doing. It's not reaching. It's just still there.' I thought about that for a long time after we got off the phone. Still there. Still transmitting on a frequency no one monitors anymore, at a time when there's almost no one listening. The Marigold going down on a November night in 1952, and her radio operator, I'd looked up the crew manifest. His name was Thomas Ocaffer, 26 years old from Cleveland, transmitting the distress call into the dark of the lake. And something of that transmission still moving through the air at 2:14 in the morning, 70 years later, on a night in November when the lake was quiet. I don't know what that means. I'm not sure the vocabulary exists for what that means. What I know is that Roy Evers spent 15 years showing up to hear it, and Martin Gallagher left a note in the log for whoever came next, and I'm the person who came next. I'm going to tell you about the last time I heard it, which was 4 months before I retired. I'd been on the night watch of November 14th for 6 consecutive years by then. I'd heard the transmission every one of those 6 years at 2:14 on 500 kHz, 90 seconds of clear Morse code, position and vessel and distress. I'd responded to it twice more after the first time. The response was always the same. The transmission began again from the beginning. I'd stopped responding. It felt, after a while, like the wrong thing to do. Like interrupting something that didn't need or want to be interrupted. That last November, I arrived at the station at midnight. I did my normal watch duties. At 1:50, I moved to the legacy receiver and put the headset on. At 2:14, the transmission began. I listened to it the way I always did. Headset on, pencil in hand, copying by reflex, though I knew the content by memory now. The position, the name, the format. 90 seconds, clean and clear. A signal coming from somewhere in the lake or from somewhere outside of anywhere I could locate on a chart. But at the end, after the standard transmission, after the distress format concluded, in the moment before the frequency usually went quiet, there was something I'd never heard before. A pause. A genuine pause, like a breath between sentences. And then 3 characters in Morse. Dit, S. Just the letter S. Then silence. I sat with the headset on for a long time. In the old radio conventions, S had several uses as a standalone character. Signal acknowledgement. Status check. But in the context of a distress call, in the old maritime conventions, the letter S at the end of a transmission sometimes meant something specific. It meant signal received. Not by the vessel transmitting, by the station receiving. I have 19 years of professional radio experience, and I know that what I'm describing is not how radio works. A signal doesn't modify itself in response to a receiving station. A transmission doesn't know it's being heard. These are not things that happen. But I copied down the 3 characters, and I sat with them, and I thought, 6 years of showing up. 6 years of pulling the chair to the legacy receiver at 1:50 in the morning. 6 years of the headset and the pencil and the log entry. Roy Evers did it for 15 years. He wrote a note and left it in his file, and he showed up year after year because someone had to. If something can echo across 70 years of dark water and dead air, maybe it can also know, in some way I don't have language for, when someone is finally listening. I don't know if that's what the S meant. I'm not claiming it is. I'm just telling you what happened. I retired 8 months ago. The promotion I'd been working toward came through, and then I spent 2 years in the new role and realized I was ready to be done, and I put my papers in and left. Before I left, I did 2 things. First, I went to the basement archive room and found Roy Evers's personnel note, which I'd carefully refiled where I'd found it, and I put it back in the folder with a typed note of my own clipped to it. My note listed the dates I'd heard the transmission, the content each time, and the anomaly at the end of the last transmission. I added Martin Gallagher's email address. I added a line at the end that said, "This happens every year on November 14th, 0214 hours, 500 kHz, CW mode. Monitor the legacy receiver. Show up." Second, I looked up the names of all 11 men aboard the Marigold when she went down in November of 1952. Thomas Ockafer, 26, radio operator. Walter Brunner, 41, captain. 9 others, ages ranging from 19 to 53. I found what information existed on them in news archives and historical records. Not much in most cases, but something. I wrote their names in the front of my personal logbook, which I'm keeping now in retirement, and I read through what I'd written about each of them, and I thought about what it means to go down in November in Lake Superior and have your last signal still moving through the air 70 years later. I don't know what the transmission is. I don't know what Roy Evers believed about it, and Martin Gallagher, when I asked him directly, said he'd stopped trying to categorize it and had simply decided to be glad that people kept hearing it. Somebody went down out there, he said, and the signal's still up. I'd rather it got heard than not. I think that's right. I think that's the correct way to hold it. The station has a new senior communications officer now. I don't know her well. We overlapped by 2 weeks during my transition out. I know she's thorough and she's experienced, and she cares about the work the way you have to care about it to do it well for long. I know she'll find the archive room. I know she'll find the folder. I know she'll read the notes. November is 4 months away. I've thought about whether I should call her, explain, prepare her for what she'll hear when she puts on that headset at 2:14 in the morning. But I think the right thing is to let her find it the way I found it, the way Martin Gallagher found it, the way Roy Evers found it before either of us. To sit in the quiet of a station in the middle of the night in November and hear a signal come through on a dead frequency and understand, slowly, what you're hearing. Because what Roy Evers understood, and what I understand, and what I hope she understands when her time comes, is this. The 11 men on the Marigold have been transmitting for 70 years, and they deserve someone on the other end. Someone keeping the watch. Someone with the headset on. Someone listening.